So again, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Thursday, it's November 7th. Today is day 398. So we're approaching almost 400 days since October 7th of last year. I'm in Amman. We have a delegation that's arrived here, just crossed over to Jerusalem today. So please keep them in thought and prayer. Next weekend's our End Still We Rise summit, being led by our Palestinian leadership team focused on women's empowerment. Of course, much of what I want to talk about today does have to do with the election that happened on Tuesday, the outcome, which is declared former President Donald Trump as president-elect. And I think the big question is, what does a Trump presidency mean in light of, the current wars and violence throughout the Middle East? What might it mean for the potential of future peace in the region? That is, of course, one of the primary questions that's being posed, at least from where I'm sitting today. All the while, in this past week, there have been numerous incursions in the West Bank by Israeli forces. There was bombing in Jenin by the Israeli Air Force. There were attacks throughout Gaza. There have been attempts continued to negotiate for the release of hostages. Hezbollah and Israel have continued to exchange fire, and the death tolls continue to mount. So I'll talk about some of what's happening on the ground here, but I do want to talk about the presidential election. So Trump has been declared the president-elect. Netanyahu's thrilled. Everybody thought that Netanyahu was holding out, that part of the reason that we are almost at 400 days of war is that Netanyahu was holding out for a Trump presidency. There are signs in Israel, and you can see these online, that show the US and Israeli flags intertwined, interwoven together. Today, the Israeli news said no one cares about who Israel's new defense minister is. There has been a change in that in the past week because now Trump is there to take up the job, or something to that effect. So Trump and his election is being lauded by many in Israel. There are billboards through certain towns that have showed banners of the flag, and then they have slogans that say things like, "Congratulations, Trump, make Israel great." I was here when the embassy was moved, and they would say, there were signs that would say things like, "From Jerusalem, from the city of David," and Jerusalem would have Jerusalem spelled out, and USA is in the middle of Jerusalem, and USA would be in red, white, and blue. And there's a little bit of that sentiment, it seems, now in Israel today. I'll be able to tell you more next week after I actually arrive in Israel. It's just been reported that Netanyahu spoke with President-elect Donald Trump on Wednesday, congratulating him for history's great comeback. He posted on X that his election victory was a powerful recommitment to the great alliance between Israel and America. I did just meet today with the deputy ambassador from the US to Jordan. I found King Abdullah also one for to congratulate President Trump. Trump's perspective on the wars Israel's perpetrating is really yet to be seen. He has said in past weeks that he would give Netanyahu a carte blanche, or at least it's been assumed, or the news has insinuated that Trump would give Netanyahu a carte blanche, that maybe there would be a few months where Israel could just do what they want. One of the questions is, how is that any different than what's happening right now? But analysts have said things could actually be much, much worse. And so there is a concern that things would get worse in terms of Israel's perpetration, of its war efforts. The thought is also that Trump wants glory to the self-delusion, bringing the wars in the Middle East to a close, which could happen in the sense that in many ways, or at least to some degree, Israel's war aims have been accomplished. The idea of Hamas being defeated, well, Hamas hasn't been eradicated, but the top Hamas leaders have been killed. The top Hezbollah leaders, Nasrallah, was assassinated. The top Hezbollah leaders have been killed. And so it's possible that Trump could bring the wars in the Middle East to an end. The big question is, what would that look like? It could look like more eradication. It could look like more displacement. It could look like higher death tolls. And so, in Trump's victory address at Mar-a-Lago, they said, I'm going to start wars, but I'm going to end wars. And so the big question is, what's that mean? And what's that look like? Now, the Intercept website said the Gaza war is the reason why Harris lost the election. Voters in Dearborn, Michigan, the largest U.S. city with an Arab population, made a significant shift towards Donald Trump in Tuesday's election, signaling strong dissatisfaction for the Biden administration and their policies towards the Middle East. Trump garnered 43% of the vote compared to Harris's 36%, which was a reversal from the 2020 elections, where Biden won 69% compared to Trump's 30%. This shift, although not decisive for Michigan's outcome, highlights a deeper fracture between the Arab American voters and the Democratic Party, largely due to anger over the handling of the Gaza conflict. So one of the big questions is perhaps Trump's win could have been significantly impacted because of the Biden administration and Harris's inability to be differentiated from the Biden administration's engagement in Gaza and its unilateral support and arming of Israel in its wars here in the Middle East. I also want to note Republicans won control of the Senate. It is yet to be seen who will take control of the House of Representatives. The control of the House hangs in the balance. As of this morning, there were a dozen races yet to be called. The numbers that I just read were Republicans were 7 seats short of hitting 218 needed to take control, and Democrats needed 15 more. So it looks like Democrats have an uphill battle. And reports are saying it could be days still before we know who has complete control of the House. If we have a Republican president, Senate, and House, it means that there would be a clear pathway forward in terms of Trump's agenda, and Republican policies being implemented. I did give a more detailed congressional update on Saturday's daily video, November 2nd. I'd encourage you to take a look at that if you're interested. I talked about some of Bernie Sanders' efforts. I'll talk about that more in the days ahead, calling for the withholding of arms from Israel. Chuck Schumer's seeking to pass legislation related to anti-Semitism on college campuses. There's a lot of moving pieces in that regard. Christianity Today published an article about how Trump's victory still runs through the church, and evangelicals voted in large part for President Trump. He gained Catholic and Hispanic voters during this election in large part because of his positions about 2 issues. Abortion, Israel was another one of those issues. There have been also articles highlighting how Catholic voters really shifted in their support to supporting Trump significantly. Exit polls published by the Washington Post seemed to indicate, asking the question of, does this represent an ideological shift among traditionally Democrat-leaning U.S. Catholics? In terms of Middle East priorities, for President-elect Trump, it's being assumed that the Saudi normalization deal would still be a priority. That was something that was on the table. He, in his first presidency, established the Abraham Accords, which were normalization deals with the Arab Peninsula, the UAE, and others. It's thought that Trump may very well allow Israel to annex parts of the West Bank. One of his main funders is the pro-settlement family, the Adelsons. Sheldon Adelson has since passed, but was a major funder during his first campaign. It was initially thought that the moving of the embassy under Trump's first presidency was because of evangelical support, but it was reported in Israel that that actually was one of the main goals of Sheldon Adelson. Adelson's widow, Miriam, according to Israeli news, gave at least $100 million to Trump's current campaign. One of her main priorities is the annexation of the West Bank. Another fear, of course, is the continued displacement of residents in Gaza and the resettlement of North Gaza by Israeli citizens. So while Trump has said he wants to end wars, again, at least if past actions are to be any indication, he has not cared about Palestinian aspirations or self-determination. And so we don't know what the cost of ending a war means. That's yet to be seen. We'll talk in coming days about the priorities of the Biden administration during this lame duck session. One priority has been dismantling illegal settlement outposts, increased pressure on Israeli extremists in the West Bank, sanctioning Israeli settlers. We were just talking about that today in a board check-in. But, there's not that much time to accomplish things that can't just be overturned as soon as Trump comes back into office. Other updates from the past week. Today marks 1 month since the start of the Israeli military offensive in North Gaza. It began on October 6th in Jabalia and North Gaza. I wanted to just summarize a few things. The entire area has been declared a civilian civilian-free military zone, meaning that the goal of getting in aid is no longer a priority because civilians are supposed to have left. I'll remind you that this is the location where the two churches are located, the Latin Family Catholic Church and also the St. Porphyrius Orthodox Church. The Israeli military established a blockade around key areas, including checkpoints at the Jabalia Club, the civil administration, the Indonesia hospital. Mass evacuations have already forced tens of thousands of people to flee, although there are still tens of thousands remaining in Jabalia and in nearby towns. Schools that have housed displaced families have faced attacks, pressuring residents to flee. Hospitals, including the Kamal Adwan and Indonesian hospitals, have been heavily targeted with ambulance and civil defense services rendered inoperative. Beit Lahia, which is densely populated with residents and displaced people, is the focus of new evacuations, and there have been severe casualties there reported. More than 1,800 Palestinians have been killed in the last month and more than 4,000 injured, and tens of thousands of homes have been destroyed. This is just in the last month in North Gaza. Severe food, water shortages exist. Many families are trapped in their homes across Jabalia, Beit Lahia, and the surrounding areas. It's the 40th day since Nasrallah's killing in Lebanon. Actually, this was yesterday on the 6th, and the new Hezbollah commander, Naim Qassem, gave a speech yesterday. There was intensified rocket fire towards Israel as a commemoration of that 40th day. The key points of Qassem's speech were emphasizing Lebanese resistance, preparing for the moment. Hezbollah said that they were preparing for this moment since the 2006 war. Regardless of the specific developments in the current war, which began over a month ago, Hezbollah said the resistance is fully prepared for a prolonged war of attrition. The death toll in Lebanon now, according to their Ministry of Health, is 3,050 killed, and those wounded is 13,658. That's the death toll since October of last year. Yesterday alone, 37 people were killed in Lebanon. An Israeli soldier was announced dead in South Lebanon after clashes, and it's been announced that 781 Israeli soldiers have been killed since October 7th. That's in Lebanon, in Gaza, in northern Israel, a total number of 781 Israeli soldiers. I wanted to summarize just some of the recent deaths since the beginning of November. 10 Israeli soldiers and non-combatants have been killed in Israel. These are Israeli deaths. So this is a summary of some of the deaths just in the last since November 1st. An Israeli officer died from severe injuries sustained 2 months ago in a booby-trapped house in Rafah. 2 Israeli soldiers were killed in battles in Jabalia in North Gaza. An Israeli soldier was killed in battles in northern Gaza on November 3rd. Another was killed in severe injuries caused by shrapnel from an interceptor missile in Nahariya. On November 4th, an Israeli soldier of Venezuelan descent died by suicide after returning from the Gaza Strip. On November 4th, a reserve Air Force officer at the rank of major died by suicide after being called to service. November 6th, an Israeli soldier was killed by a missile strike from Lebanon in the Western Galilee. On November 6th, an Israeli civilian was killed by a rocket strike in a kibbutz, Kfar Mazarik, near Acre, which is on the Mediterranean coast, that was launched from Lebanon. And on November 7th, an Israeli soldier was killed during ground battles in South Lebanon. There were several raids last night on the 6th of November into the West Bank. These are updates that I've not given in my daily updates yet. These are just things that have, since I've been here in Jordan, I wanted to give you updates about. In the West Bank, in the past hours since Wednesday, the Israeli army withdrew from the city and the refugee camp of Jenin after an operation that lasted several hours, leaving significant destruction in infrastructure, including the shooting and killing of a man. The Israeli army stormed the city and the refugee camps of Tulkarm amid intense clashes with bulldozers conducting demolitions in the camps. The Israeli army raided the city of Al-Bira and arrested a young man. The army stormed the town of Nehalin, west of Ramallah, and launched a campaign of home raids. A young man was seriously injured in the Shufat refugee camp, allegedly after attempting a car ramming attack. And Israeli forces raided several villages in South Hebron. This is just in the last 24 hours. These are the raids that happened in the West Bank. Large-scale campaigns of arrest and thefts against Palestinian citizens in Qadqiya city, and jewelry and money were reported to be stolen by the Israeli forces. In Israel on November 6th, Israeli prison authorities introduced new guidelines for women who are in prison, limiting them to wearing gray training jumpsuits, which is significant because Muslim prisoners are now prohibited from wearing headscarves or burqas. On November 7th, the Knesset passed a law authorizing the Minister of Interior to deport families of individuals who have committed security offenses. This law allows for the expulsion of family members closely related to someone convicted of a security-related crime. The families can be expelled for up to 20 years after the offense, even if the family members were not involved in the incident, provided that they had prior knowledge of the intention to commit the offense or have expressed any approval of it. So that's an update just from the last 24 hours. That's not even a summary of the news from the past week. I promised last week I would give an update on the International Court of Justice. The South Africa submitted 750 pages to the ICJ and 4,000 pages of supplementary materials in their case about why they believe Israel has committed genocide in Gaza. Forensic Architecture published an 827-page cartographic analysis in support of South Africa's case. You'll recall also that the ICJ in July 19th, heard the case about the occupation and delivered an opinion determining that the Palestinian territories constitute one political unit and that since Israel's occupation in 1967 and the subsequent creation of Israeli settlements and the exploitation of natural resources, the occupation is illegal under international law. On the 18th of September, 2024, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution calling for the end within a year to Israel's unlawful presence in the West Bank and Gaza. I was also asked if there were any mainstream religious denominations that have come out in support of Senator Sanders' resolution to block the $20 billion worth of aims to Israel, and I did not have time to follow up on that specifically, so I'll bring that back in next week's update. A few other updates from the past week related to Gaza. UNICEF said that more than 50 children were killed in the Jabalia refugee camp in a 48-hour period over last weekend. The IDF said that aid organizations did complete the second polio vaccination round for children, administering more than 1.1 million vaccinations. The death toll in Gaza is at 43,391. There have been continued attempts in terms of potential negotiations, but the prospects for a ceasefire Friday of last week, there's really been no progress. There were at least 68 people killed in Gaza Friday a week ago. Hamas and Fatah representatives met in Cairo, have formed an administrative committee set to manage Gaza. Details have not been disclosed. There's been no agreement reached with Israel, that would allow them to be able to govern Gaza, at least at this point. The entire population that remains in northern Gaza is at imminent risk, says 15 UN agencies, of disease, famine, and ongoing bombardments against an apocalyptic situation in the territory. Of course, significant news this past week, Israel ended its agreement with the UN agency providing aid in Gaza, UNRWA, based on Knesset legislations that passed, making it illegal for UNRWA to engage and operate within Israel. The toll of UNRWA staff that have been killed in Gaza since October is 237, a toll among UN staff that's never been seen since the UN was created. Over 200 UNRWA facilities have been damaged or destroyed, killing more than 560 people sheltering there since last October. Significantly in Israel, Netanyahu dismissed his defense minister Gallant over an increasingly wide crisis of confidence. It's said that Gallant, held Netanyahu in check a bit. The new defense minister is Israel Katz, who was the foreign minister, and a new foreign minister was appointed. Gideon Sa'ar is the new foreign minister of Israel. This was all discussed. Sa'ar was discussed significantly in mid-September. He maintains hardline opposition to Palestinian statehood. He served previously as Israel's education, interior, and justice minister. There's this affair happening in Israel called Bibi Leaks. One of the Israeli officials was said to have released documents, and that's being called the Bibi Leaks affair. The Knesset voted and passed a bill on Tuesday aiming to prevent the establishment of a U.S. consulate to serve Palestinians in Jerusalem. That was in anticipation in case Harris got elected. And in the West Bank, I gave some of those updates already. There have been terrible incursions this week. More than 60 people were arrested. There were deaths. Jenin was targeted quite significantly. I mentioned the airstrike that happened on Monday night. Numerous Palestinian villages were raided. A Palestinian man was shot and killed after ramming a 26-year-old woman and a 15-year-old teenage boy with his car. Escalations between Lebanon, Hezbollah and Lebanon and Israel have continued. I talked about Naim Qasim's speech. There was a Hezbollah operative abducted. Israelis actually they took their naval forces and they went in on a small boat that resembled a fishing vessel and kidnapped this Hezbollah official, Imad Fadel Amhaz. Iran is promising, the Ayatollah Khamenei has promised that he would attack Israel, but at the same time, the foreign minister on November 5th said Iran doesn't want an escalation. So we don't know what's going to happen in that regard. Antony Blinken said he warned the Iraqi government to not get involved because Iran said that they were going to attack from Iraq. Syria, Israel said its troops carried out a ground raid into Syria to seize a Syrian it had accused of working with Iran. The Israeli military also said its troops seized the citizen that was a part of the networks in this ground raid. So that happened this last week. And then the state of Palestine announced 54 countries and organizations have made a collective call to members of the UN Security Council to take immediate steps to halt the provision or transfer of arms, munitions, and related equipment to Israel, the occupying power, where there are reasonable grounds to suspect that they may be used in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. And so I have that November 1st document letter that was sent and signed by 54 countries. So that is an update from this past week. We are starting to plan our speaking tours, our Pilgrimage to Peace tour. We'll have a South Atlantic Pilgrimage to Peace tour early next year. I know we'll be in Texas and Arizona and Colorado also. But let me just close by saying we do have our Advent campaign. I don't know if you've seen yet, our Advent campaign is Not Arms. We just have the graphics for that available. We should have a landing page that'll come out in the bulletin on Friday, which I think is actually tomorrow. We'll have another bishop's letter accompanying that. We'll have an action alert calling for the U.S. To de-escalate and withhold arms and all the things we've been asking for the past 13 plus months, a comprehensive ceasefire, return of hostages, the release of those held unjustly in Palestinian prisons, Palestinians held unjustly in Israeli prisons, my apologies, that the core issues of the conflict be addressed, that, arms have been used in violation of international human rights law. And so just wanted you to know those action alerts will be coming out, and our Advent campaign will be Advent not arms, calling for peace instead of violence. So would encourage you and welcome you to join us in that. We'll have an in-person vigil in Washington, D.C. We'll have an online vigil, which will have international Christian leaders leading us in prayer in December as well. So those dates and things will be announced very soon. So may the Lord go before us and may peace come quickly. In the name of Christ. Amen.